Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the City Chatter Podcast. I'm your host, John Bernstrom, Public Information Officer for the City of Grand Forks. And our guest this week, we've been bouncing around. We go to council member and we've been going to staff. Another staff member for the City of Grand Forks, Collin Hanson. Collin, thank you for joining us. And Collin, you are, okay, now here's the deal. I see you every day. And then I was going through my head and I'm like, what's Collin's title? And then I'm looking on our stuff at City Hall and I have you down for two titles. Which one is it? I have Senior Community Development Planner, and I have Community Development Manager. Which one are you?
I'm a Community Development Manager.
Okay, all right.
It's changed a few times over the last couple of years.
Well, and that's kind of what I want to start off here with. So the Office of Community Development, that's even as a department is kind of morphed, right? So to give people a bit of a history lesson, post-flood, the Office of Urban Development was a pretty major office as we're buying houses and selling houses and building homes and affordable housing and what do we have? All this federal money. And then as time has gone through, this kind of morphed, which is fair to say it's now community development. Can you talk a little bit about the day-to-day of the Community Development Office?
For sure. Like you said, the Office of Urban Development in the post-flood recovery was huge. We received over $100 million in federal funding to help with that recovery. And so the Office of Urban Development used to be at the Grand Forks Housing Authority. It came over to City Hall. It's now merged with planning. So as a department, we are planning and community development. Day-to-day community development, I guess our department is broken up into three divisions. So we have the planning division, your typical reviewing plats.
Zoning.
Yeah, the stuff that I don't worry about, and that's over my head.
That's right, blocking and tackling and stuff.
Yep, not so much fun for me.
Yeah.
Then we have economic development, which deals more with our Jobs Development Authority, providing loans to businesses, property that's owned out in the industrial park, things of that nature.
We have a few leases out there. Yeah.
Yep. And community development is where I work, and the kind of the division that I manage focuses more on how do we get federal funding and some of our local grant dollars that we provide to nonprofits that ultimately serve the residents of Grand Forks. So a lot of our day-to-day are working with a lot of our nonprofit agencies and partners who are providing services on the ground to those who are low to moderate income, people who are homeless, people who might have special needs, making sure that they have the resources they need, helping coordinate across agencies so that folks are communicating with one another, and kind of keeping a tab as things evolve. So as we see kind of an increase in homeless families in the community, we try to keep, as best as we can, keep our finger on the pulse of things that are changing for people who are low income.
And that's a good point. So you talked about like post-flood, that was housing. 100%, all levels. I know you just got into another planning stage, if you, I shouldn't air quote it, that's what it's called. It's a planning stage.
Yep.
What is the focus now? Is it still a major housing focus, or is that morphed? Has that morphed at all?
It's changed a little bit. So I would say the last 5-year plan we had for using our federal funding focused a little bit more on our, I can say them non-housing community development needs. So that would be public facilities is the term we use, but things like the Grand Forks Senior Center.
Sure.
Different amenities, I guess you could say, parks, playgrounds, that sort of thing. But now I'd say with the recent change in housing affordability and availability, which is happening all over the country, this plan for the next 2025 to 2029 5-year period is focusing again more on housing. So if that's looking at increasing the amount of affordable rental housing we have, the home ownership opportunities, and even looking at ways that we can help improve the quality of housing for homeowners as well.
Is that something, I don't mean to dumb it down, are you talking like the city building homes or the city working with nonprofits, stuff like that, to help them build homes, improve home? Like, is the city building housing right now? That should be the question with these funds.
Yeah. At this moment, the city doesn't. When I say we, I should say we as a funder.
Oh, so, right.
Yeah. So typically, we don't take a lot of these actions ourselves. We work with other agencies that go out and actually develop properties. So an example of that is we have provided $630,000 of federal funding to the Grand Forks Housing Authority.
There we go.
To go and acquire raw land, and then they will work as the developer to They'll work with a developer, they'll find the funding, and they'll actually build and create that housing. So it's more of how do we use these funds to help private and public enterprises actually tackle the problems.
And then having your office within the planning and zoning and within the economic development branch of that, make sure that housing is in the right spot.
Absolutely.
Right?
There's a lot of crossover there.
There is.
And
yeah.
that's the kind of the best part of being in one department is a lot of times we're communicating about different projects that come to us and different ways that we can participate, even if it's just providing context. So when we go to the housing authority who is working on this project, we can, as they have questions, sometimes it's easier for us to answer them rather than going through the kind of a typical process.
Right.
We can communicate well, and that's not just within our department, but as we fund projects like the Grand Forks Senior Center, we have an over $2 million expansion of their kitchen facilities. They're adding a drive-through, they're adding offices.
Meals on Wheels originates out of there.
Absolutely. And so as we go through that process, we work with our building safety department as we kind of make sure that things are being built properly, that we do our inspections, that HUD requires us to do, the federal government requires us to do.
So you're talking federal funds. There's no such thing as free money, right? There's rules to follow and stuff like that. You talked about it went from housing to, it's kind of morphed back to housing as far as the focus. Is that focus determined here locally, or are you being told at a federal level this is what you need to focus on with these funds? Does the communication go up and down, or is it only up? Is it only down? How does that work as far as determining how those funds should be spent?
So the priorities are really set by us at the citizen level.
Right.
So HUD requires us to go out, and we actually hire a third-party consultant, Root Policy Research, who compiles a lot of the data, but they do so much outreach. So in 2024, I think we had 4 public hearings and public comment periods where we reached out to the community, we reached out to stakeholders. There were in-depth interviews held with CVIC, United Way, different entities that serve folks who these funds are intended to serve. And they take all of that feedback and they help condense it down and pull some of the findings out of that. Now, there's nothing really surprising that comes out of that. We know we need more housing. We know we need to help, the homeless.
Right. Help the needy.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So there's usually no surprises, but really those priorities, we will have about 5 goals over the next 5 years. 3 of them are housing related, and that's really driven by this public outreach process.
And then the guidance. So is the guidance specialized to Grand Forks, or does Grand Forks has different guidance from the federal government than, let's say, Fargo?
Not really.
Not really. Okay.
It's pretty consistent, at least within the state. So as far as Fargo, Minot, Bismarck.
But if you were to say Dallas, right?
Yeah.
They have different needs. Okay.
Different needs, different problems. And, the folks in North Dakota for the state and the cities that receive these block grant dollars, we all work with the same person at the federal government who is applying the rules, so to speak.
Right.
So we have that consistency, and we meet, I'd say, every quarter, and we meet tomorrow actually as communities across North Dakota to say, how do we work together to make sure we all collectively understand the federal bureaucracy and that we're all following the rules, and kind of come up with strategies of, hey, what's working in Minot, what's working in Bismarck, to make sure that we all work together and can learn from one another.
And then this is the learning curve in every job, right? So how does Collin land in this job? Like, I don't remember going to college and seeing anything that said CDBG on it with any college course. How does a career path land you here?
I ask myself that question too sometimes. Well, I actually started in the nonprofit sector. So I went to the University of North Dakota, graduated in 2016. I studied political science and nonprofit leadership.
Okay.
And out of that, I worked at the North Valley Arts Council for a little while, and then worked for Evolve Grand Forks as their first director for about 3 years. So I had some background in that nonprofit management space.
Right.
I had studied government and politics in college, and this, coming into community development was a fun mix of those two things. Being able to work with nonprofit agencies and government where they intersect. I feel like I've had some experience and some education in both of those. And yeah, there's no training for how to read the Code of Federal Regulations. It's not fun or enjoyable. But you know what? It's really about finding the right people who have been doing this for a while. I got to learn from some great mentors at City Hall. Meredith Richards, longtime community development
She retired.
director.
We can't get rid of her.
Yeah,
I see her all the time.
Yeah, she's still in City Hall.
Yeah.
Thankfully, because
Yeah, I know that's a brain you don't want to lose.
absolutely. So yeah, really calling on folks who have been doing it for many years and have some of that institutional knowledge, and then really developing relationships with folks at the federal level who ultimately interpret those rules is important as well. So there's a lot of learning.
Have you caught yourself? Because I don't know, with my job, right? I do a lot with state government, right? You're working with federal government. All of a sudden, there's this switch where you're just like, oh, I know that person, and I need to, you know what, and no, you're talking to the wrong person. You need to go. Has that switched for you, or people are coming to you? Hey, you've been doing this long enough. Now somebody new in the job. Are they talking in Williston? Collin knows.
It's happened a little bit, and
Yeah,
I think
it's funny how that switches.
I know, and it's weird because each community does things a little bit differently. So, you know, we've had a rental rehab program, or we had a rental rehab program, I should say, for several years called the Home Sense program, and we worked with Red River Valley Community Action to administer that. Well, as another community was looking to start a similar program, you know, communities were part of a national coalition of communities that we have resources. We can email one another, and so there's constantly emails going back and forth, communicating with folks in other cities of, well, hey, how did you operate this in your community? I want to know, you know, what you thought worked, what didn't work, and how I can hopefully apply that to serve folks in my community. And there's that sort of, yeah, I've gotten that call a few times from folks, but then I've also made that call. So
And then it triggers in your head. You're like, oh, I'm the old guy.
yeah, I'm the one answering questions.
I'm the one
now.
answering questions. And it's funny how those networks work. Within communicators around the state of North Dakota, one person that I communicate with quite a bit is actually the communications lead for Department of Corrections, of all places. Right?
Really?
We just cross paths, and we're like, oh, you specifically work with the legislature. Kaylee's she's a good one to bounce info off. It's worked out pretty good. It's kind of funny how that works out. Now, this isn't something necessarily that falls under CDBG, Community Block Grant, or anything like that, but it's going through your office, the planning, economic development, the old water treatment plant site. That's one of those, kind of a blank slate, right? I've had people come up to me, they're like, well, just do something. And I'm like, well, it's a sea of concrete that is just a bit of a mess, but it's 2 blocks worth of space that we can either knock it out of the park, or you can really miss.
Absolutely.
Just talk about. Are you involved in that project? Not even involved, but I'm assuming there's a housing aspect to that, which then kind of pulls you in.
Yeah, and like I said, most things that come through our department are a bit of a team effort, right? We all chip in where we can and where we have expertise. So while I'm not leading it, you know, tangentially, we all kind of have a hand in moving things along. What's really exciting is, like you said, it's 2 big blocks that we could get right or get wrong.
Yeah.
But I think the key here is we want to dream big, and this land has been in the public ownership for so long, and it has served the city of Grand Forks for decades and decades. So how do we honor that sort of commitment that, you know, we made a long time ago to say that this land is to serve the public good of Grand Forks? How can we do that justice with what we want to plan there for development? And there's certainly a lot of needs in our community. And as we go through this process to figure out what are we going to do with this, I think we're going to see things like housing, maybe some commercial development come through. It'll be interesting to see as this process happens, what really rises to the top in terms of where we can have an impact and really create an awesome public space that connects the downtown, the edge of the downtown, to the downtown core, and from there to the Greenway.
To the Greenway, and then you have that very established, beautiful near South Side neighborhood there, right?
Yes.
You know, you're trying to mix all of that together.
Yeah, and a brand new skate park as well. which
Right.
a lot of people don't know is actually a CDBG funded project.
That was. I wasn't aware of that.
Yep.
I knew the park district did that. My kids, back in their daycare days, that was the park they went to from daycare. They went to that park, and they'd play in the Greenway, and they'd run around in the skate park, and they'd watch kids doing it. My kids, from going to daycare to then volunteering at the same daycare, they've been to that park quite a bit. They've gone almost full circle. It's when you talk about that development, it reminds me a little bit for anyone who's been to Winnipeg. They have the Forks area, right?
Yep.
Then that's their, but it's an old warehouse district. That was their old water intake. That was their old, all those buildings down there were city infrastructure that have turned over. Now there was private developers, right? Somebody has a vision, right? And all that stuff. But you go see some of that stuff. My wife and I, we were up there about a year ago, and we're like, I can kind of see it now, right? This building here was their water intake from the river. It's now a restaurant.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, and I've been to the Forks too
Yep.
a couple times, and it's incredible to see what a community with vision can do with a space like that. And it really does take, I think, public and private partnership to make those work.
Yes.
I mean,
I agree with you.
You gotta have business and commerce there to draw people in, and then you have to have that public space for everyone to enjoy as well.
Yeah.
Opportunities for public art, opportunities for performance. That's
Well, the trail system, right? That's public, right? That's where a city gets in. All right, we're gonna the discussion with the old water treatment plant. How does that connect to the greenway, right? And what does that look like? Well, the greenways, that's city infrastructure 101 right there, right? There's books written on that of this is how you should build a floodplain and a way to go and all that stuff. Well, it's also a huge recreational area for us. So connecting all that, and I get what the end game may be. How to get there is a tough one. I'm excited to see what could happen to that space.
Yeah, and I think the key there is public input and engaging in the public process. That requires citizens who care about what our community looks
Right.
like and what opportunities and amenities we provide to participate. So, I mean, as we put out opportunities for the public to engage, the more people we have involved, the better, and the more people will use it.
Yeah, and there's multiple ideas, right? There's multiple ideas. You hear every once in a while, well, it's winter, so you can't have this, or this. And you're like, well, it got to 30 degrees this just yesterday, and there's nothing but people walking all over the place because we're excited to be outside.
Yeah, and I think the one opportunity we really have as a community is embracing being a winter community, right? And there are other cities that we can look to as an examples of communities that do that well. The Forks up in Winnipeg is not completely dead during the wintertime.
No.
There's activities there. There's people skating on the river. There's all kinds of activity. And so it's really finding opportunities to have activities, to create opportunities for people to connect rather than staying in our house and saying, boy, I wish someone did something.
That's right. That's a good point. One thing, this is going to be a history lesson down the road, and I could probably write a book on, well, this is what we did. I'm not saying it was right, but this is what we did during COVID. I know that you specifically, you got pulled in about 10 different directions of, well, we got to do something. So let's see what we can do. You were involved in kind of, I don't want to call it business development, business resiliency. Is that a way to put it?
Yeah.
Talk about your work during COVID. It was difficult, and I work in government. We were making stuff up because we had to do something. Everyone was looking at us, and we didn't know what tomorrow brought.
Yeah, I mean, that's a kind of a famous saying almost.
Yeah.
You got to create something out of nothing.
Yeah.
You're not given a playbook on how to deal with this, right? So you have to work with partners and stakeholders, and you have to do some outreach in order to do that. So when I started with the city during COVID, I was managing a revolving loan fund, which was COVID money intended to support businesses as they recovered or tried to weather the pandemic.
Right.
And so
Get through the shutdown.
Yeah, which is another thing that when I was thrown into the deep end, they said, hey, there's this code of federal regulations that applies to this money. You have to figure out what these regulations say you can and can't do.
Which they just drew up. We've never seen them before.
Yep. They said, these are brand new. No one knows how it works. You have to write a plan. You have to implement it. Good luck.
Yeah.
And so that was the introduction, really.
Yeah.
But, we did some public outreach with the small business development centers. We worked with partners such as SCORE, the EDC, to really try to reach business owners and those who were really struggling, and many, if not most, were during the pandemic.
It was a hard time.
And so there was that kind of immediate response of how do we get cash to these businesses in a way that's sustainable? How are they going to use this money to make sure that they can weather the storm? And then towards the end of that, I'd say that after about 1.5 to 2 years later, it's more of, well, how are they going to use this money to grow? How are they going to use this money to take it?
Because they got a hold of it,
Yeah. So you know,
it was an interesting time, man.
a challenging time for sure.
Yeah, it was. So, Colin, part of the reason is we were talking in the hallway at work. Part of the reasons I was going to have you on here because we started talking sports. You, like many of us at City Hall, my side hustle, I'm doing some work tomorrow and the rest of the week with state hockey. You're involved in sports too. You're a ref. How
Yes,
long have you been doing that?
So I started reffing in high school, kind of lower level stuff.
Yep.
But I've been taking it more seriously. I've been a varsity official for probably 5 or 6 years now in North Dakota and Minnesota. So it's certainly something that helped prepare me for public service. You know,
Getting yelled at all the time?
getting yelled at, getting a lot of critical, negative feedback.
That's right. There we go. Yep.
Opportunities to learn.
That's right.
Good
words.
However you want to, however you want to interpret that. But no, it's a really fun way to stay active in the wintertime. I know that if I wasn't officiating high school sports, high school basketball, that I would probably be at home,
Sure.
being a couch potato.
And it's easy to do, right?
Watching
Yep.
movies because it's easy to do that when it's cold outside. But 4 or 5 nights a week now. Well, not now. I had my last game last night in East Grand Forks. So yeah.
So and no postseason assignments?
No postseason assignments this year, but I was in East Grand Forks last night. They played Park Rapids. East Side won by 22 points, 85 to 63.
Do you with the referees? Do you focus on girls, boys? Do you have one that you do more than the other? Is it just, hey, we got a game, we need a body?
Yeah, for high school sports, we don't really break it up that way.
You don't break it up. Okay.
I've worked everything from North Dakota AA, so working Central versus Fargo North,
Right.
boys basketball, all the way to Class B, going to Glenfield, North Dakota,
There you go.
for a
Yeah.
Griggs Mid-Cota versus Benson County girls game. In Minnesota too, we work games for Sacred Heart or Fisher Climax and single A. We do all the way up to AA. We'll go to Hallock or East Side.
Sure.
And do games there too. So we really don't divide based on girls or boys or you have to be registered or have reciprocity in North Dakota and Minnesota
Right.
to work in either state. But
I know at the college level they split them up a little bit. I wasn't sure in high school if they do that or not.
and at the college level, the rules are very different between boys and girls,
Sure.
or men's and women's basketball.
Yep.
So there's a little bit more difference in the rules when it comes to men's and women's at the college level and even the division level. High school is much more consistent, though. We have different rules in Minnesota versus North Dakota on some small things.
So you're not the only official that's come through City Hall. Spencer Halverson, who's now in Devil's Lake, is an official. Danny Weigel, City Council member, is an official. They both hopped up to college a little bit. Has there been any inkling within yourself of, all right, do I want to, is officiating just like playing, moving up a level?
Well, maybe I'll get there one day. It's a lot more travel.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's a lot more time away. I'd certainly be open to it. It's one of those things. I'll be the first to admit I'm a bit of a slower learner compared to others.
No.
So it's taken me some more time. I didn't play high school basketball,
Sure.
at JV or varsity or anything like that. I was more on the stats side.
Yep.
So I have a different eye than maybe someone who's a player.
Right.
Or someone who is coached even. Like there's different backgrounds people come to it with.
There are. Yeah.
So no, I would say that I certainly am growing in my own right, but it's constantly a practice of trying to get better and improve on your own game. So that involves just like players go and watch film, coaches watch film. As officials, we often go and watch film as well.
And I brought that up because, again, what I do on the side is I help on the TV side and run some camera, right? And I enjoy it. And I've been asked, hey, do you want to go on the road with us, do a couple of road games? And I draw the line there. It's more travel. I want it to still be fun. If all of a sudden this becomes an every weekend deal, that becomes a job. I've got kids, right?
Yeah.
And I try to balance this. That's why I asked that. I'm just like, all right, is this something I'm gonna put my head down, I'm gonna go do it?
Yeah.
Or is it the whole, no, this is a lot of fun what I'm doing right now, and I don't want to lose that.
Yeah, and I really enjoy high school sports a lot, and I think my favorite environment is one similar to we had last night at East Grand Forks Senior High. It was a packed gym, a high energy environment. It's not a massive gym, but it's great. Minnesota AA basketball. I love going to small gyms out in rural North Dakota. I like working at Red River and Central as well. But I grew up in a small community. Those small Class B and Class A
Class A schools.
schools are really where where I feel the most comfortable and I have the most fun personally. When there's a good pep band rocking and there's a good student section, you know, there's nothing that gets me more invested too as an official, knowing how important it is for the players, the coaches, but also that community that they're in.
Yep. I've asked this to Councilmember Weigel as a ref, so I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
Do you have
Hopefully not a rules question.
No. Do you have a favorite gym?
A favorite gym?
Right. And some of that is just like you said. It may not be the largest. It may not be the small, but it's like a time and place. I did this game at this gym. It was a big game. It was a Friday night. Crowd was into it. Like you leave and you're like, boy, that was a lot of fun. And then that's your perception of that gym.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I get that. It's a time and place.
Absolutely. I'd say I have two gyms that are sort of, I'd say, over the last couple of years, really been my favorite. One is East Grand Forks Senior High.
Yeah.
If you've been there, it's a relatively new gym. Very nice, clean. But that place, when it's full, man, that place gets loud and excited.
Yeah.
And it just creates a really fun environment, especially if there's a band there.
Yeah.
And then I'd say the other one is a unique one, which I brought up earlier, Glenfield, North Dakota.
Okay.
Is a literal Quonset building. The sideline, the space between the 3-point arc and the sideline towards kind of the baseline, the first like 6 feet, there's not enough room to take a corner three.
Right.
It's tiny.
If they shoot from there, they're out of bounds.
Yep.
Right.
And you're from Lancaster, so you know tiny gyms.
I know tiny gyms. Yeah.
Glenfield, I think, has 3 rows of seating.
Yep.
On
That was
either side.
Lancaster.
Yep.
It takes 50 people to be packed.
Absolutely. So, you know, and I don't think it's not easy to beat an environment like that and it's more challenging too as an official when we have tight sidelines. We don't have great angles sometimes on plays. It's even more challenging for us when we have a baseline that's 2.5 feet deep.
Right.
There's barely room to stand there and give a player the ball for an inbound.
Every whistle's like a break in a movie. Everyone gets up and shuffles around. There's people waiting at the door to get to their seat, but waiting for a whistle because you can't get to your seat unless you walk on the court.
Yeah, the number of times I've had to wait to help a player inbound a ball because there's kids running around along the sideline. So that kind of environment, I don't think you can beat it.
So, yeah, you mentioned I grew up in Lancaster. They have a new gym now, but their old gym was 3 rows. The ceiling was in play. There was ground rules for the ceiling because it was low ceiling. And my senior year, we weren't good. I think we won 3 or 4 basketball games. We weren't very good. Weren't very good. They had a senior day, right? It's not an all-star game. It's for seniors. And you go there and you're talking with players that you've been playing against, you know, for how many years. And we're just talking about, hey, yeah, your gym is, you know, I did this. Every one of them just like, hate your gym. He goes, you guys were terrible. And then we go there and we beat you by 5 just because we can barely get out of our own way. And they were like, yeah, it was a fun gym. Yeah, it was a good time.
And it certainly can be a competitive advantage for players or teams that practice on those small gyms.
Oh yeah, small courts and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a number of teams in that Glenfield gym or Binford as well as in that Griggs Mid-Coda Co-op. Binford's another really small gym, but some teams have a real hard time adjusting to such a small court. Especially if you come from a pretty large home court yourself. So sometimes it can be a competitive advantage as well, and it's always fun to see teams try to adjust to that.
Yeah, it's you watch the movie Hoosiers and the different gyms. That's real.
Yeah.
Those gyms exist.
Yeah, it's
a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. Collin, thank you very much. Appreciate
John.
this. We learned a lot about federal funding, CDBG, community development. That's good stuff. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Collin Hanson for joining us for the Community Development Manager for the City of Grand Forks. If you want to catch this episode or other episode of the City Chatter podcast, just go to grandforksgov.com/podcast. We'll catch you next time.